My name is Abigail Nicole. I'm 27, and I grew up in the regal shadow of Rosewood Heights, New York, a sprawling family estate, rich in name, status, and secrets. As the youngest daughter of the Caldwell Empire, I should have inherited enough to live with dignity. But on the day my father died on December 20th, 5 years ago, I was written out of his will. Legally, I didn't exist. The reading in the grand mahogany-lined room, the lawyer cleared his throat and delivered the headline, Abigail Nicole, no inheritance. I watched my brothers exchange glances. My mother's eyes shifted to the floor. Even the portraits on the walls drifted, as if embarrassed. They convinced me it was for family harmony, and rainwater carried me home to an echoing hallway that once held my whispered prayers. I was devastated, rejected, yet stronger than I believed. They thought they'd buried me like a bad investment. What they didn't know was, I had started studying law in secret at night. I'd passed the bar 3 years ago. Every textbook, seminar, and court clerkship was a stone in the path they'd laid for me. Now I had the tools. Tonight is Christmas Eve. The house is bright holly wreaths, firelight, laughter. My brothers and stepmother are celebrating the $12 million trust fund they think is theirs alone. They don't know I'm walking into the same legal hall where I once sat unseen, because tonight, I become the lawyer who will rewrite their own story. The courthouse on Maplewood Avenue was eerily silent that Christmas Eve, but I had made an appointment no one in my family thought I'd ever be qualified to make. I walked past the grand columns draped in garland, and into the chamber where so many of my family's fates had been sealed. Inside, I met Judge Walter Kessler, a retired family acquaintance with sharp eyes and a reputation for loyalty to the law, not to people. Abigail Nicole Caldwell, he said, eyeing the folder. I slid toward him. I wasn't expecting to see a Caldwell here as a legal representative, let alone the youngest one. I kept my voice calm. I'm here to challenge the Caldwell family trust on the basis of fraud, coercion, and unlawful omission. The folder held more than just court filings. It contained years of careful documentation, secret audio recordings, unsigned drafts of my father's original will that included me, and a sworn testimony from Susan Keller, my father's former legal assistant. She had confessed before moving to Arizona that the will had been modified under pressure not by my father's wishes, but by my stepmother, Lorraine. Judge Kessler flipped through the documents slowly, his fingers resting on the notarized statements. This isn't a small accusation, he murmured. You're saying your father's legal final will was forged or at the very least, doctored without his full consent? Yes, I said, and I can prove it. For the past 4 years, I'd lived modestly under a different name in Brooklyn, taking court-appointed cases, gaining experience, and waiting for this moment, because my goal was never revenge. It was justice. The judge tapped the folder, then leaned back in his leather chair. And what exactly are you asking for? I looked him square in the eye. I'm petitioning for temporary conservatorship of the Caldwell Family Trust, pending full audit, effective immediately. He blinked. Tonight? I nodded. Tonight? Before they gift each other what rightfully belongs to all of us. He stood, adjusted his glasses, and looked toward the snowy window. This is bold, Abigail. But you've always had your father's spirit. The stamp came down. Approved. As of Christmas Eve, 8:12 p.m., I was now the temporary guardian of the Caldwell Trust, all $12 million of it, and I had one more place to go tonight. Home. The Caldwell estate stood like a glittering fortress against the snowy Virginia hills, every inch lit up with candles in the windows and golden string lights wrapping the balcony rails. For anyone driving by, it was a picture of Christmas perfection. But behind those frosted windows lived the same people who had erased me from our family, people who had toasted my disappearance with champagne and folded me out of the photographs. Like I was just an old receipt. I hadn't stepped foot in that house since I was 19. Back then, I left with a garbage bag full of sweaters and my father's last words ringing in my head. You deserve better than this house ever gave you. He died 2 weeks later, and within 3 months, Lorraine, my stepmother, had removed my name from the will. The others went along with it. Even my 2 older brothers, Thomas and Reed, said nothing. Just take the education money and let it go, Reed had said, but I didn't. I used it to fund law school, in silence, in secret. Tonight though, I wasn't here as a guest. I rang the bell. It was Reed who opened the door. His jaw slackened at the sight of me. Abby, he looked over his shoulder. Lorraine, call everyone, I said calmly. This concerns you all. He stepped aside, and I walked in like I had never been erased. Inside the dining hall, the table was set for 12. Cranberry sauce in glass bowls, roast turkey steaming under silver lids. Laughter floated up from champagne bubbles. My sister-in-law, Elise, dropped her fork. Lorraine stood from the head of the table, wine in hand, wrapped in a red velvet gown that probably cost more than my entire college tuition. Well, she smiled tightly. The prodigal girl returns. No, I said, pulling a folded document from my coat. The new guardian of the Caldwell Trust returns. There was a flicker of confusion, then panic. I don't know what you think you're doing, Thomas said. I'm not here for dinner, I replied. I'm here to inform you that a legal audit has been approved. Effective as of an hour ago, the entire estate is under review, including properties, cash holdings, and future distributions. I laid the official court stamp on the table. Lorraine leaned in. Her hand trembled as she read the judge's signature. You can't be serious, she whispered. Oh, but I am. I turned to my brothers. Did you even read the revised will she gave you to sign? Clause 7.3 says any misrepresentation of heirs voids all distributions. All of them. You're bluffing, am I? The room fell into stunned silence. I walked over to the fireplace and took a slow breath. The same mantle where they once hung stockings for everyone except me. This house will not be sold, I said. But the rules are changing. Starting tonight. I picked up my purse. Enjoy your meal. I'll see you in court after the holidays. And just like that, I left. But I knew, the moment that door closed behind me, nothing in that house would ever be the same again. The night air was bitter, but my lungs had never breathed freer. My boots crunched through the snow as I walked down the same driveway where I once begged my stepmother to let me stay. That teenage version of me, the one with trembling lips and hope still left in her eyes, was buried here somewhere, beneath the snowbanks and shattered expectations. But not anymore. This Abigail Nicole was carved from legal briefs, sleepless nights, and the pain of being forgotten. And tonight she held the matchbox. Back in my small apartment in Richmond, I opened my briefcase and pulled out the thick folder I'd assembled over the past 2 years. It was everything: bank records, letters, handwritten notes my father left me in his journal. God bless the fact that he hid it in his old toolbox. And the original draft of the will before Lorraine got her manicured hands on it. That version had my name on it, not just as a beneficiary, as the trustee. My father's words echoed again. One day you'll understand why I couldn't protect you then. But I trust you'll protect what's mine. It was his way of saying, don't become bitter. Become unstoppable. And I had. Over the last 3 months, I'd worked alongside a trusted probate judge who'd once been my professor. He knew the signs of fraudulent coercion and agreed to reopen the estate under sealed review. Once he'd seen the original will, he didn't hesitate. He issued a suspension of disbursements, freezing every account tied to the Caldwell Trust. And the best part, they had no idea the new documents had been processed until I walked in with the court order. My phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I answered. Abby, a voice came through. It's Thomas. I didn't speak. I didn't know. Lorraine said you'd refuse the inheritance. I never saw the revised will, I said calmly, because she made sure I wouldn't. There was a long pause. She lied to all of us, he admitted. And now we're in the dark. No, Thomas. Now I'm the light. He exhaled shakily. What happens next? I glanced at the calendar. December 23 ARD. You'll receive a summons by the 26th. It's your right to contest, but I wouldn't recommend it. Why? Because I'm not just in the courtroom. Now, I own it. Click. The call ended. I leaned back, watching the city lights flicker outside my window. Somewhere, Christmas bells were ringing from a distant church tower, and I imagined Lorraine pouring herself a third glass of wine, hands trembling, trying to piece together how the invisible daughter she raised to scrub floors had become the very woman capable of dismantling her empire. I didn't want revenge, not in the petty, fire-burning way they might assume. I wanted justice that came not in flames, but in signatures, stamps, and steel-bound law, and I was just getting started. Christmas Eve arrived with the kind of stillness that used to haunt me, a silence that reminded me of the years I spent pretending not to hear laughter from the grand dining room while I ate alone in the kitchen. But this year, I wasn't alone, and I wasn't silent. At precisely 9 o'clock a.m., I walked into the courthouse in Charleston, dressed in my tailored navy coat, my hair pinned up just like my mother used to wear it in court when she defended the innocent in her small-town practice. I carried my brown leather briefcase, not for fashion but for power. Outside the probate chamber, the Caldwell family had gathered, stunned, speechless, and almost theatrical in their confusion. Lorraine, with her gold earrings and pearl brooch, was pacing like a lioness out of control. My two half-brothers Gavin and Eli stood behind her, their arms crossed in disbelief. And then there was Thomas. He looked tired. Maybe for once, he'd begun to understand what being pushed aside felt like. "You can't be serious," Lorraine said, storming toward me as I handed over the official court notice to the clerk. "I'm entirely serious," I replied without even flinching. "Today is the motion hearing, and the judge will be reviewing the original will the one you hid. I never, you did, and you know it." I turned toward the doors just as they opened, and Judge Raymond stepped out. "Miss Nicole," he greeted me first, his voice calm, firm. "Your Honor." I nodded, then turned to Lorraine. "This way, please. You may want to sit." The hearing began. For 45 minutes, I laid out every piece of evidence. Emails written under Lorraine's name using my father's login, proof of property transfers initiated suspiciously the day after his hospitalization, and of course, the original will found in a secure box with my father's initials and dated weeks before his death. Lorraine's lawyer attempted to object, but Judge Raymond overruled nearly every one. "The fraud is evident," the judge said at last, folding his hands. "And what's worse, Mrs. Caldwell, is the coercive conduct used to deceive not just this court but your own family." Lorraine's jaw tightened. Her eyes narrowed. "This is absurd." "No," I said softly. "This is justice." And then came the moment I'd waited for. Judge Raymond stamped the documents and looked me directly in the eye. "Effective immediately, Abigail Nicole is hereby reinstated as the trustee and legal executor of the Caldwell Trust, with full authority over its assets, holdings, and inheritance disbursements." I stood. My hands trembled, but not with fear, with purpose. I'd done it, not with threats, not with revenge, with the law, with patience, with truth. After the courtroom cleared, Thomas lingered behind. "I was blind," he said, "but I see now. You deserved more. Always did." I didn't respond, because the truth was I didn't need his apology. I didn't need his permission. To be whole, outside, Charleston's streets sparkled with lights and wreaths. Children laughed as bells chimed in a distant shop. I exhaled deeply, my breath misting in the winter air. I was the forgotten daughter once, but not anymore. By the time the courthouse doors shut behind me, my world had changed, but it still hadn't sunk in. I didn't drive straight home. Instead, I took the long way, past Broad Street, under Spanish moss trees, until I reached the old Caldwell estate. The house stood the same as I remembered it. White columns, 3 stories, ivy curling around brick. Christmas wreaths hung on every window like a postcard from a life I was never truly part of. 10 years ago, I used to look at those wreaths from the outside, standing barefoot in the cold, while everyone else sang carols and drank cider in the warmth. I was always the one holding the camera, or cleaning the plates, never allowed at the table. I was told I should be grateful to be here at all. But now I wasn't just allowed in, I owned it. A month before I filed the legal motion, I'd approached the estate's holding agency in secret. The property had technically been placed into a family trust, but with the judge's ruling, that trust was now under my name. And the moment the gavel hit the bench in my favor, the house was mine. That same afternoon, I returned with keys in my hand. Lorraine hadn't come home yet. She was probably still fuming behind her lawyer's desk, trying to make sense of a world where her manipulation didn't work anymore. But the housekeeper, Daisy, who had worked there for 30 years, was waiting on the porch with tears in her eyes. "I always knew you'd come back," she whispered. "I prayed for it every night after your daddy passed." I hugged her tighter than I'd hugged anyone in years. The inside of the mansion hadn't changed. Same rugs, same oak banisters, same grandfather clock that chimed every hour without fail. But there was dust in corners now, and a quiet heaviness in the air. "You're not just visiting, are you?" Daisy asked. I smiled. "No, I'm staying." And not just staying, I was rebuilding. That night, I took down every family portrait that hung in the front gallery. Not out of bitterness, but because they weren't mine. They were curated illusions, staged smiles hiding years of exclusion. Instead, I placed up framed newspaper clippings of my law school graduation, my first court win, and the scholarship I earned that no one came to celebrate. I replaced the dining table's centerpiece with a candle I bought from a street vendor because real light doesn't need to be expensive to be beautiful. And then I went to the fireplace. The same one where, years ago, I sat alone on Christmas night with a single cookie someone had tossed at me like I was a pet. I lit the fire. This time, I sat in the grand chair, feet tucked up, cocoa in hand. No yelling. No orders. No pretending. Just peace. It was Christmas Eve, and I, Abigail Nicole, the girl they cast out like an unwanted draft in a perfect house, had returned. Not to gloat, not to punish, but to rewrite what family meant, not by blood, but by truth. Daisy knocked softly at my door just as I was about to turn in. Miss Abigail, she said, hesitant. Someone's outside. Says it's urgent. I raised a brow. Who? She hesitated. Your sister. The same sister who helped erase me from the family. Who took what was mine and called it deserved. Who told people I was too emotional to be trusted with real decisions. I stood, shoulders squared. Let her in, I said. The fire behind me crackled softly, casting a glow on the title deed that now bore my name. Let the next chapter begin. When Lorraine walked into the drawing room, she looked like she'd aged 10 years in 10 days. Her coat was barely buttoned, her heels clicking too loudly against the polished floor she once glided over like she owned the air itself. She didn't speak right away, just stared. Her eyes scanned the room, at the fire, the new pictures, the missing portraits, and the title deed that lay casually on the mantel like a family photo. I heard the ruling, she said at last, her voice cold and raspy. Congratulations. I nodded, calm and steady. Thank you. She took a few steps in, hands trembling slightly. Whether it was the cold or the truth catching up with her, I didn't ask. You really did it, she said. You studied, you passed the bar, you became a lawyer, all behind our backs. I didn't think you needed updates, I said. Not after I was cut out of the will like a rotten branch. She flinched. Good. Her eyes found Daisy, still standing nearby with a folded blanket in her hands. You still have her here? Lorraine asked. Daisy stood straighter. She has me here because she didn't treat me like furniture. Lorraine looked back at me. What do you want, Abigail? Revenge? You have the house, the title, the trust. You've proved your point. Can we stop pretending this is noble? I smiled, not out of malice, but from the clarity that comes when the truth finally breathes. I don't want revenge, Lorraine. I want correction. She scoffed. Correction? Yes. Correction for every Christmas I spent alone in the attic. For every birthday card that was forgotten. For every time you told people I wasn't real family. Don't be dramatic. She snapped. I'm not, I said. The drama was your life. You lived it in luxury. I lived it in silence. Now, silence speaks. She sat down slowly on the edge of the couch, as if gravity had finally caught up to her pride. So what now? You rewrite the will. You take it all. And I disappear? I haven't rewritten anything, I said. Yet. Her head whipped toward me. What do you mean, yet? I stepped closer. There's a clause in the Caldwell Trust. One even Father forgot existed. It says, in the event of credible fraud, the trustee may reassign assets based on merit and good character. And who decides that? You? The court did. But now, yes, I do. Her voice broke. So you'll leave me with nothing? I looked her in the eye. I'll leave you with exactly what you gave me. But I will offer you something better than what you offered me. A chance to earn. She was stunned. I continued. There are dozens of girls in this town who were tossed aside like I was. I plan to turn this house into a law mentorship center, scholarships, boarding, coaching. I want to make sure no girl is ever told she's not enough just because she doesn't wear the right last name. And what does that mean for me? It means you're welcome to help, but not as an heir, as a volunteer. Her face turned a shade I hadn't seen since our teenage years when I won the debate club trophy and she broke it the next morning, claiming it was an accident. You think I'd stoop that low? She whispered. No, I said. I think you'd grow that tall, if you want to. The room was silent again. The only sound was the ticking of the old brass clock over the hearth. Lorraine stood. She didn't answer. She didn't accept or decline. She just left, and as the door shut behind her, I turned back to the fire, breathing in the weight of what I'd just said. I wasn't a child anymore. I wasn't waiting for someone to claim me. I had claimed myself, and I had rewritten more than a will. I had rewritten a legacy. Christmas morning arrived dressed in gold and frost. The estate, which had once stood as a cold monument to hierarchy and hush money, now breathed something different, something warm. The scent of cinnamon rolls wafted from the kitchen. Laughter not muffled or guarded, but full and fearless echoed. From the back halls, I walked down the same staircase I once swept as a child. But this time, not with a dustpan in hand but with a purpose. Girls in plaid scarves and worn coats were huddled around the fireplace, sipping cider and unwrapping small gifts I'd prepared the night before: books, journals, leather-bound folders with their names embossed in gold. Each one of them had a story, a bruise they didn't deserve, a dream someone had told them was too big. Daisy stood beside the breakfast table, her hands never idle. "You did it," she whispered when I passed her. I smiled. "We did it." Outside, the snow had begun to fall again, quiet as truth. I opened the study doors to find a stack of envelopes, applications, resumes, a letter from the State Bar Association approving my mentorship program. 10 scholarships had already been sponsored by local law firms. I sat at the large oak desk, the same one my father once sat behind, writing checks to children he never played with. I opened the drawer. There, neatly folded, was the last will and testament I had revised, not out of vengeance, but to set things right. The trust now included provisions for education, shelter, and reform for underprivileged girls across the state. The Caldwell estate was no longer just a house. It was a turning point. As I flipped through the letters, I noticed one envelope with no stamp, just my name scrawled in a trembling hand. I opened it. "Dear Abigail, I thought you'd want to know I've decided to leave town for a while. Maybe forever. I was never good at staying where I wasn't adored, but I see it now. You weren't a shadow. You were a mirror, and I couldn't handle what you reflected. I won't ask for a second chance, but I will try to become someone who deserves one. Maybe someday, our paths will cross again with fewer wounds between us." Lorraine folded the letter slowly, pressing it between the pages of my old law textbook, the one I'd studied in secret when everyone thought I was just making tea. Later that day, the front door creaked open again. I turned, expecting Daisy, but found a man instead. His suit was damp from the snow, his hair grayer than I remembered. "Abigail," he said, "it's really you." "Uncle George," I replied. He hadn't visited since the will was read. The first time. His face carried the guilt of the entire bloodline. I wanted to say he began, but I raised a hand. "I know," I said. He looked around at the girls filling the parlor, some of them waving awkwardly. "You turned it into a school?" "Into a future," I corrected. He chuckled, bittersweet. "You know, your father. He always said you were too soft to handle the family business." I met his gaze. He was right. George frowned. I continued. "Because this isn't a business anymore. It's a purpose. And softness isn't a weakness when it builds something stronger." He looked down, then back up. "I was wrong to keep quiet back then." "Then speak now," I said gently. "Not to me, to them." He looked at the girls again, some now preparing a song near the grand piano, and I saw his throat tighten. "I will," he said. "If you'll let me help." I nodded. Everyone deserves a second chance. That night, as the estate glowed under strings of fairy lights and the echoes of Christmas hymns, I sat on the front steps with Daisy. She handed me a cup of cocoa and looked at the stars. "You really rewrote the story, didn't you?" she asked. I sipped the cocoa, warm and real. "No," I said. "I just finally picked up the pen." The day after Christmas, I walked the estate grounds alone for the first time in years. It was quiet in the way only a place heavy with memory could be. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I passed the old stable, the one where I used to hide my law books beneath a loose floorboard. I'd come here at night with a flashlight and whisper court cases into the dark, as if saying them out loud made them real. Now, those books rested in the new library wing I'd added to the estate, right where the old ballroom used to be. I had the chandelier taken down, not sold, just moved and replaced with warm amber lights and oak shelves stacked with law journals, memoirs, and poetry. This place was no longer built for chandeliers. It was built for growth, arrested weather. Vane creaked overhead as I stopped near the paddock. In the distance, a red pickup truck pulled into the long driveway. For a second, my heart skipped. No one was supposed to arrive today. We had finished all our events. Then I saw the passenger door swing open, and my breath caught. It was him, James Caldwell, the family's attorney, my cousin's childhood friend, the man who had once told me I'd never pass the bar because law requires grit, not pretty speeches. We hadn't spoken in over a decade. He stepped out of the truck slowly, wearing a gray wool coat and that same expression he used to wear in the courtroom, unreadable, but aware of every detail. I didn't move. Abigail, he said softly, like. The name still surprised him. You're trespassing, I replied, half smiling. He chuckled and held up a document. I brought paperwork. I figured you'd still like things done properly. I walked toward him, boots kicking up snow. What kind of paperwork? I asked. He handed it to me. A deed transfer for a vineyard in Colorado. The final piece of my father's estate, the one asset I hadn't yet touched. It had been left to James in a vague addendum no one understood. Why? I asked. He looked past me toward the mansion. Because you built something better than a fortune here, and I figured it should all be yours. There was a pause, a long one. You didn't have to do this, I said. I didn't do it for you, he replied. I did it for that girl who used to walk around with dirt on her knees and a constitution in her pocket. I laughed quietly. She never gave up. No, he agreed. She just waited for the world to catch up. We walked back toward the house together. The porch was already lit with lanterns for the New Year's Eve shelter dinner. Dozens of girls would arrive with their stories and their fears and leave with a binder full of options and a suitcase of hope. When we stepped inside, Daisy was lighting candles in the hallway. She looked at James, gave him a nod, and then turned back to her list. The house didn't care about old grudges anymore. It cared about new beginnings. Upstairs, I opened the study door and placed the vineyard deed next to the trust documents. The estate now stood at a value of nearly $12 million, but I didn't feel rich. I felt whole. I turned to the large window overlooking the front lawn. The same lawn where, once upon a winter, I stood frozen as my siblings opened presents I wasn't allowed to touch. Now, a dozen girls were building snowmen on that lawn. They wore mismatched gloves and borrowed coats, but they laughed like queens. Behind me, James spoke again. You know, he said, you could run for state attorney. I raised an eyebrow. I thought law required grit. It does, he said. But now, grit looks like you. I smiled. I'll think about it. Don't think too long, he said, walking out. History won't wait. That night, I lit one last candle and placed it beside my parents' old portrait. Not out of sentiment, but as closure. I wasn't their servant anymore. I was their successor, and I had rewritten the will not just on paper, but in blood, resilience, and quiet vengeance wrapped in grace. The wind outside howled like a restless ghost, dragging wisps of snow across the porch as I sat at my grandfather's old desk, now mine. The same mahogany surface that once bore the ink-stained hands of a man who never thought I was worthy of his name now bore the final draft of the trust. It was 11:47 p.m. on Christmas Eve, 12 minutes until Christmas Day, 12 minutes until I did what no one in this family ever expected, closed the chapter on their greed and opened the door for something else, justice. I reviewed the final lines again, carefully. The new will had been ratified in court last week, but I kept the ceremonial copy for this night. Inside it stated, all assets belonging to the Harrington Trust, including real estate, stocks, vineyards, bonds, and intellectual property, are hereby transferred under the permanent legal authority of Abigail Nicole Harrington, G.D. Legal Executor and only living heir recognized by law. I leaned back, fingers resting lightly on the pages. No more exclusions. No more illegitimate child whispers. No more family meetings behind closed doors. It was all here written in my hand, notarized with my seal. They called me a nobody growing up. My older brother Daniel had once said, "You're more suited for secretarial work than success." Now, Daniel was one of many currently appealing to the board of a trust I owned. He didn't know I read his letter last week. Dearest Abby, I was wrong. We were all wrong. We never saw you for what you really were. Please, let's make this right. He ended it with happy holidays. I never responded. Not out of spite but out of understanding. Sometimes, silence is louder than any gavel. I stood, walked down the main staircase, and stepped into the drawing room. The fireplace crackled with a soft orange glow. On the far wall hung a framed newspaper article. Small town girl becomes state's youngest legal trustee over $12 million empire. Underneath it, Abigail Nicole makes history after rewriting her family's future. Across the room, Daisy had begun placing teacups on a long table. 20 girls, some orphans, some runaways, were sleeping in the upstairs guest rooms, tucked in warm with hand-stitched quilts. all rescued from the very system I was once cast into. This house had once kept me in the shadows. Now, it held light in every window. And just before midnight, as the clock ticked toward Christmas, I walked into the main hall and opened the large oak doors. Snow fell gently. Behind me, James stood in the archway. You ready? I turned to him and nodded. I've been ready for 10 years. Together, we stepped onto the front steps. Candles flickered in the windows. The girls upstairs were still sleeping, but I knew when they woke up tomorrow, it would be Christmas. And this mansion wouldn't feel like a prison anymore. It would feel like home. A few days later, the family tried one last time through a lawyer in New York, but I wasn't intimidated. I wrote a 6-page reply, citing every clause they'd violated, every precedent I had in my favor. They never responded again. I wasn't just a lawyer, I was their lawyer now, and they'd never see the inside of this estate again. Questions to reflect on. What happens when the underdog learns the rules and rewrites them? Can legacy be more than inheritance? It is redemption? And most of all, was Abigail right to forgive no one? Subscribe to more revenge stories. Share, like, comment.